The hat fell like a stone into dust, landing beside the boy's bare feet with a soft thud that seemed to echo across the entire ranch. Samuel McKinnon stared down at his weathered Stetson, unable to meet 8-year-old Tommy's eyes. The question hung in the desert air between them like smoke from a dying fire. He's not coming back, is he? 3 days. 3 days since Tommy's father rode out to check the northern fence line and never returned. 3 days since Samuel found the horse wandering riderless near Devil's Canyon, saddle still warm, reins torn and bloody. 3 days of searching every arroyo, every hidden gulch, every place a man might fall or hide or die. Samuel's calloused hands trembled as he bent to retrieve his hat. The boy stood perfectly still on the ranch house porch, his small frame silhouetted against the fading amber light. Tommy wore his father's old shirt, sleeves rolled up past his elbows, the fabric hanging loose on his thin shoulders like a shroud. His dark eyes held that terrible adult knowledge that children shouldn't possess, the understanding that sometimes the people you love simply vanish into the vastness of the desert and never find their way home. Mr. McKinnon. Tommy's voice cracked. Papa always said you'd tell me the truth. The rancher's throat constricted. James Morrison had been more than a hired hand. He'd been Samuel's closest friend for 15 years, ever since they'd both drifted into this god-forsaken corner of Arizona territory, with nothing but determination and desperate hope. James had built a small cabin on the eastern edge of Samuel's land, raised his boy alone after fever took his wife, worked dawn to dusk mending fences and breaking horses with quiet dignity. Now James was gone, and his son stood waiting for an answer that would shatter what remained of his childhood. Samuel replaced his hat, the familiar weight of it suddenly feeling like lead. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, painted in shades of rust and gold by the setting sun. Somewhere out there buzzards circled, somewhere out there the truth waited in silence. "Come inside, boy," Samuel said finally, his voice rough as sandpaper. "We need to talk." But as they turned toward the house, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them, multiple riders approaching fast from the south. Samuel's hand instinctively moved to his Colt, and Tommy pressed closer to his side. In this territory, riders after dark usually meant trouble. The riders materialized from the gathering dusk like specters, 3 men on lathered horses, their faces hard and purposeful in the lamplight spilling from Samuel's windows. Marshal Pete Garrison led them, his badge catching the yellow glow, but his companions wore no symbols of law. Samuel recognized them, bounty hunters from Tucson, men who dealt in blood money and asked few questions. "Evening, Sam," Garrison called, dismounting with the weariness of a man who'd ridden hard. "We need to talk about James Morrison." Tommy's small hand found Samuel's arm, fingers digging in like claws. The boy had gone rigid, sensing the shift in atmosphere, the way predators circle before they strike. "What about James?" Samuel kept his voice level, but his mind raced. These men hadn't come to help search for a missing ranch hand, they'd come for something else entirely. Garrison pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket, the parchment crackling in the evening air. "Turns out your friend had a price on his head. $500, posted by the territorial governor. Bank robbery in Phoenix 2 months back. Guard died in the shooting." The words hit Samuel like physical blows. Bank robbery, murder, $500, more money than most men saw in 5 years. He felt Tommy's grip tighten, felt the boy's world crumbling in real time. "You're lying," Samuel said quietly. "Witnesses identified him by that scar on his jaw, the one he got breaking that Mustang last spring." Garrison's eyes were cold, professional. "These gentlemen tracked him here. They're within their rights to collect the bounty, dead or alive." The taller bounty hunter spat into the dirt. "Where is he, rancher? Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Samuel's thoughts churned like a dust devil. James Morrison, quiet, honest James who read scripture to his son every night, who'd never raised his voice in anger, who'd saved Samuel's life during a flash flood 2 winters back. A killer, a thief. But Samuel remembered something else, the way James always flinched when strangers approached, the haunted look that sometimes crossed his face when he thought no one was watching, the careful way he avoided towns and lawmen, the scars on his hands that he'd never explained. "Haven't seen him in 3 days, Samuel said carefully. "Horse came back without him." Garrison nodded. "We'll camp here tonight." Start searching at first light. If he's dead in that canyon like you think, we'll find the body. If he's running," the marshal's hand rested on his gun, "well, we'll find him either way." As the men led their horses toward the barn, Tommy looked up at Samuel with eyes full of questions and fear. The boy deserved the truth about his father, but which truth? The James Morrison who taught him to read and rope cattle, or the wanted man whose past had finally caught up with him? Samuel made his choice in that moment, knowing it might destroy them both. Dawn broke like a wound across the eastern sky, painting the desert in shades of blood and copper. Samuel had barely slept, listening to the bounty hunters' voices drift from the barn where they'd made camp, their words sharp with avarice and violence. Tommy had curled up beside him in the big house, small body trembling with nightmares that Samuel couldn't chase away. Now the hunters moved with methodical precision, checking their weapons and studying maps of the surrounding territory. Marshal Garrison sat his horse like a man resigned to unpleasant duty, but his companions showed the eager anticipation of wolves scenting blood. "Canyon's about 2 miles north," the shorter hunter said, adjusting his rifle scope. "If Morrison's body's down there, buzzards will show us the way." Samuel saddled his gelding with hands that betrayed nothing of the turmoil in his chest. He had to go with them. Staying behind would look suspicious, and besides, he needed to know what they would find, or more importantly, what they wouldn't find. Tommy appeared at his elbow, dressed and ready to ride. "I'm coming too." "No." Samuel's voice cut like a blade. "You stay here. He's my papa." The boy's chin jutted forward with stubborn determination that reminded Samuel painfully of James. "I got a right to know." Garrison overheard. "Boy's got a point. Might need him to identify remains." The word hung in the air like a curse. Samuel wanted to refuse, to protect Tommy from whatever horror waited in Devil's Canyon, but he could see the marshal's suspicion growing. Any normal father figure would want the boy along to confirm his worst fears. They rode north in grim silence, 5 horsemen and a child, following game trails that twisted between towering red rocks and stands of mesquite. The desert had awakened with them. Hawks circled overhead, lizards scurried across their path, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote's howl drifted on the morning breeze. Devil's Canyon opened before them like a wound in the earth, its walls dropping away into shadows that the sunrise hadn't yet touched. The bounty hunters dismounted and began their descent, boots sending small avalanches of stone rattling into the depths. Samuel helped Tommy down from his pony, watching the boy's face go pale as they approached the canyon's edge. Below them something glinted in the growing light, metal and leather, the unmistakable shape of a man's belongings scattered across the rocky floor. "There," the tall hunter called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Found something." But as they descended toward the debris, Samuel's trained eye caught details the bounty hunters missed: the torn clothing positioned too carefully, the lack of carrion birds, the way the morning shadows fell across the scene like a stage set waiting for actors. James Morrison had always been clever. The question was clever enough to fool professional manhunters. And if he had escaped, where did that leave his son? The items scattered across the canyon floor told a story of violence and desperation: torn shirt fabric caught on jagged rocks, a broken spur half buried in sand, spots of dried blood painting the stone like dark flowers. But to Samuel's experienced eye, something felt wrong about the scene, too neat, too obvious, like a dime novel's idea of tragedy. Tommy stood frozen at the canyon's edge, staring down at what remained of his father's life. The bounty hunters picked through the debris with professional indifference, but Marshal Garrison moved more carefully, his lawman's instincts clearly troubled by the same details that bothered Samuel. "No body," the shorter hunter complained, kicking at a stone. "Could have been dragged off by animals, but there'd be more blood," Garrison finished. "More torn clothing, bones at least." Samuel knelt beside a piece of leather that had once been part of James's favorite belt, the one with the silver buckle his wife had given him before she died. He picked it up carefully, feeling Tommy's eyes on him like a physical weight. "Mr. McKinnon," Tommy's voice was barely a whisper, "is Papa really gone?" The question cut deeper than any blade. Samuel had known this boy since he was barely walking, had watched James teach him to ride and shoot, and read from the family Bible. Tommy deserved honesty, but what kind of honesty? The truth that his father might be a wanted killer, or the truth that he might still be alive, running like a hunted animal through the desert. Samuel stood slowly, the leather belt piece heavy in his hand. As he did, something else caught his eye. A small carving in the rock wall, fresh enough that the stone dust still clung to its edges. The mark was subtle, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. The letter was inside a rough circle, the same symbol James used to mark his personal belongings. A message, a sign that only someone who knew James intimately would recognize. Samuel's heart hammered against his ribs as he decoded the meaning. The carving pointed south, toward the old mining country where abandoned shafts and hidden canyons could conceal a man indefinitely. James was alive, James was running, and he'd left this sign knowing Samuel would find it. Found his gun, one of the bounty hunters called out, holding up James's Colt revolver, cylinders empty. Looks like he went down fighting. Tommy made a sound like a wounded animal, and Samuel's decision crystallized with painful clarity. He moved to the boy's side, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Tommy," he said quietly, so only the boy could hear, "your papa loved you more than life itself. Whatever happened here, whatever folks might say about him, that's the only truth that matters." The boy looked up at him with eyes too old for his 8 years. "Will you take care of me now, Mr. McKinnon?" Samuel's throat constricted. Taking in Tommy would mean lying to federal marshals, harboring the son of a fugitive, and risking everything he'd built in this harsh country. But looking down at the boy's trusting face, he realized the choice had been made long ago. "Yes, son," he said, "I'll take care of you." Above them the bounty hunters continued their futile search, unaware that their quarry had already vanished into the vast anonymity of the American West. The bounty hunters rode out 3 days later, frustrated and empty-handed. Marshal Garrison lingered longest, his weathered face creased with suspicion and something that might have been relief. "If Morrison's alive out there," he told Samuel as he prepared to leave, "he's smart enough to stay gone. Territory's big enough to swallow a man whole if he knows how to disappear." Samuel nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Reckon it is. Boy deserves better than to grow up wondering if his father was a killer." Garrison added quietly, "Sometimes the kindest truth is the one that lets folks sleep at night." After the marshal's dust cloud faded into the southern horizon, Samuel found Tommy sitting on the porch steps, whittling a piece of pine with the knife James had given him for his 7th birthday. The boy had barely spoken since they'd returned from the canyon, but his small hands worked the wood with steady concentration. "What you making?" Samuel asked, settling beside him. "Whistle," Tommy said without looking up. "Papa taught me how. Said music could carry messages farther than shouting." Samuel's chest tightened. Even in his carefully orchestrated disappearance, James had found a way to leave his son something precious, not just the memory of love, but the tools to express it. That evening, as purple shadows stretched across the ranch, Samuel made his way to the old oak tree behind the house where James used to sit and read. Carved into the bark fresh as morning, he found another message: "Tea is safe. Thank you, brother. J." Samuel traced the letters with his fingertip, then took out his own knife and carefully carved his reply below. "Always." 3 months passed. Tommy threw himself into ranch work with the fierce determination of someone trying to outrun grief. He learned to brand cattle, mend fences, and read the subtle signs of weather and wildlife that meant the difference between prosperity and ruin in the desert. Samuel taught him everything James would have wanted him to know, and some things James couldn't have imagined. On a clear November morning, as they drove cattle to the southern pasture, Tommy suddenly pulled up his horse and pointed toward a distant ridge. "Mr. McKinnon, look." A lone rider sat silhouetted against the sky, too far away to identify but close enough that his presence felt intentional. The figure raised one hand in what might have been a greeting or farewell, then disappeared behind the rocks. Tommy stared at the empty ridge for a long moment, then reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the wooden whistle he'd been carving. He put it to his lips and blew a clear, sweet note that echoed across the valley like a prayer. Somewhere in the distance, another whistle answered, faint but unmistakable, carrying on the desert wind like a ghost's goodbye. Samuel watched the boy's face transform as understanding dawned. James Morrison might be gone forever, but somewhere in the vast wilderness, Tommy's father lived and remembered and loved him still. "He heard me," Tommy whispered. "Yes," Samuel said simply. "He heard you." Years later, when Tommy had grown into a man and taken over the ranch,
He would still ride to that same ridge on clear November mornings. He would play his father's whistle and listen for an answer that never came, but somehow always felt close. And sometimes when the wind was just right and the desert held its breath, he could almost convince himself that love was stronger than distance, that some bonds could never truly be broken. The hat that had fallen in the dust that terrible evening still hung on its peg by the door, waiting for the day its owner might return to claim it.